At 20,000 feet over northern Germany, the sky was a storm of metal. The formation was breaking apart, flak bursts ripping holes through the blue, tracer fire lacing the air like lightning. Lieutenant Jack Reynolds' P-38 Lightning, call sign Sweet Pea, took a direct hit on the port engine. A dull thud, a burst of orange flame, and suddenly the cockpit filled with the smell of burning oil and cordite. The left propeller froze. The plane yawed violently, kicking its nose toward the ground. Alarm screamed in his headset. His oxygen mask rattled with every sharp breath. Reynolds slammed the throttle forward on his remaining engine, wrestling the control column to level the wings. The altimeter spun down. 18,000 feet, 16,000, 14,000. The radio crackled to life. "Jack, you're hit! Bail out! Repeat, bail out!" It was his wingman, Hollis, shouting over the static. Reynolds glanced at the horizon. He was deep over enemy territory, more than 150 miles from the coast. If he bailed out here, he'd be a prisoner before sunset. He muttered into the mic, "Negative. I'm not done yet." He feathered the dead propeller, trimmed hard right to counter the drag, and looked at the gauges. One engine still held steady. The Lightning, wounded but alive, clawed its way through the sky. Then, just ahead, 4 dark shapes appeared. Focke-Wulf 190s, turning toward him like sharks scenting blood. Reynolds blinked sweat from his eyes. The P-38's right engine roared, straining under the load. He knew the numbers: asymmetric thrust, limited lift, nearly 70% loss in climb rate. Against 4 fighters, he had seconds before they reached him. He could run, dive for the cloud deck, and hope. But as he felt the aircraft shudder beneath him, a single thought cut through the noise. If I'm going down, I'm taking someone with me. He rolled the Lightning inverted, pointed its nose toward the oncoming formation, and dove. His airspeed climbed, 380, 400, 420 miles per hour. The dead engine screamed in protest as the frame vibrated. The Germans saw him coming, one smoking, one prop feathered. And they laughed over their radios. Easy prey. They didn't know the P-38's secret. Its twin booms gave it unmatched stability in dives, and at terminal speed, nothing German-built could keep up. Reynolds closed the distance in seconds. The .50 caliber Brownings in the nose thundered. A stream of tracers lanced through the lead FW-190, tearing its canopy apart. The wreck exploded into shards of fire. 3 left. He climbed through the debris field, flipped the Lightning on its side, and came around again. The second German broke high. Reynolds squeezed the trigger and saw his rounds stitch across the fuselage. The fighter spun out, trailing smoke. But now his ammo counter was flashing empty, and his right engine was coughing. He leveled out, heart hammering. The remaining 2 FW-190s pulled back, unwilling to chase a man who was supposed to be dead, but had just killed 2 of their own. At 12,000 feet, Reynolds steadied the plane. "Still here," he whispered. The cockpit was silent except for the rattle of the instruments and the distant hum of that one defiant engine. He turned the Lightning toward home, flying on fumes, 1 prop dead, and an ocean between him and safety. But he smiled beneath his mask, because in that moment, he knew the fight wasn't over. Not for him, not for the P-38. Before Lieutenant Jack Reynolds ever took off from England, the P-38 Lightning had a reputation that sent shivers through new pilots. They called it a widow-maker. Too complicated, too temperamental, too dangerous. Early in the war, inexperienced pilots feared the aircraft more than the enemy. Its dual Allison engines could tear themselves apart if handled wrong. Compressor failures, asymmetric stalls, runaway props. 100 ways to die before you even saw combat. Training manuals warned, "Treat the Lightning with respect. Mishandled, she'll kill you faster than the enemy will." But those who survived long enough to master her said something different. The old hands at the 20th Fighter Group had a saying, "If you can fly her, she'll never let you down." The myth started in Europe. Pilots transferring from single-engine fighters struggled to adapt. They over-controlled the yoke, misunderstood the counter-rotating propellers, and lost aircraft in flat spins. Some blamed the design, others blamed the pilots. Either way, fear stuck. American newspapers amplified the rumor. One journalist dubbed it the flying experiment, a plane too heavy for dogfights and too complex for rookies. Even within the Air Force, some officers preferred the P-51 Mustang's simplicity. German pilots, however, had no such doubts. They'd already given it a name, der Gabelschwanzteufel, the fork-tailed devil. To the Luftwaffe, it was a phantom of death that could appear without warning and vanish into the clouds. Reynolds' squadron briefing room walls were lined with clippings, German propaganda calling the lightning mechanical madness. Photos of wrecked P-38s beside reports of successful bomber escorts. Every pilot saw the contradiction, fear on both sides, but for entirely different reasons. Jack Reynolds wrote about it in his flight diary 2 nights before the mission that nearly killed him. The entry read, "They say the lightning's cursed, that she stalls without mercy, that her controls lock up in a dive. Maybe so. But every machine has its ghost, and this one's mine. She doesn't kill fools. She teaches them." His crew chief, a mechanic named O'Rourke, used to joke that the P-38 had 2 personalities. She's an angel if you respect her, and a demon if you don't. In truth, the Lightning's danger came not from its design, but from its brilliance ahead of its time. Its systems, turbo superchargers, intercoolers, redundant hydraulics, demanded precision and feel, not brute strength. Pilots who treated her like a P-51 died. Pilots who listened to her lived. The Air Corps knew it. By mid-1943, new training programs were written to teach pilots the rhythm of dual-engine management. They drilled muscle memory, throttle, prop pitch, mixture, balance. Every adjustment had to be instinctive. The P-38 didn't forgive mistakes. But in the hands of a pilot who understood her, she became unstoppable. That's what Reynolds believed the morning he took off from RAF King's Cliff. A belief that would be tested when one of those engines turned into a fireball. Because the Widowmaker myth wasn't just wrong. It was the opposite of the truth. The Lightning wasn't a killer of men. She was their last chance to live. Long before Jack Reynolds' Lightning roared through the skies of Europe, it was born in a place that never slept. Lockheed's Burbank plant in California. In 1942, the complex stretched across 250 acres of assembly lines, test bays, and steel hangars, so vast they looked like small cities. By day, the noise was deafening. Rivet guns, grinders, welding sparks. By night, the hum of generators and the rhythmic pounding of press hammers rolled across the valley. Over 90% of the workforce were civilians. Many had never built aircraft before the war. Women in denim overalls ran the rivet lines. Men who had been grocers and teachers became precision machinists overnight. They worked in 12-hour shifts, 6 days a week. At the height of production, one P-38 rolled off the line every 63 minutes. Lockheed's engineers had done something radical. Instead of a single fuselage, they built a twin-boom structure. 2 long tails, each housing an engine, connected by a central nacelle, the cockpit and gun bay. The design was unconventional, alien even, but it gave the plane something no other fighter had: perfect stability. Kelly Johnson, the young chief engineer behind the project, called it a machine that fights like a bullet, not a bird. Each Lightning carried 2 1,125 horsepower Allison V1710 engines with turbo superchargers that let it climb higher and faster than any single-engine fighter of its time. Where the Spitfire gasped for air above 25,000 feet, the P-38 soared effortlessly past 35,000. The design gave it unmatched endurance, nearly 1,300 miles of range, enough to escort bombers deep into Germany and back. For the pilots who flew her, the twin engines meant one thing: survival. If one failed, the other could still carry them home. That feature, a redundancy, wasn't just a mechanical luxury. It was an ideological one. The American way of war was built on systems that refused to fail. In a single word, overbuild. Every line worker in Burbank understood it. They didn't see themselves as engineers or soldiers. They saw themselves as part of something bigger. "We don't make airplanes," one welder said in an interview later. "We make second chances." Contrast that with Germany. By 1944, German aircraft factories were operating under constant bombing and labor shortages. Skilled engineers were drafted, and forced labor filled the gaps. Where Lockheed could produce 10,000 P-38s, Messerschmitt struggled to complete 1,400 Me-262 jet fighters, a technological marvel buried under chaos. Reynolds' own Lightning bore the fingerprints of hundreds of anonymous workers. On the inside of the cockpit panel, under the dull olive paint, one mechanic had etched a small message before shipment: "Bring her back home." That same panel was still there when Reynolds' left engine exploded over Germany. The P-38 wasn't beautiful by accident. It was the product of an industrial faith, a belief that precision, teamwork, and scale could turn the tide of war. Every bolt, every weld, every seam was a prayer in aluminum. And that's why, when his plane started dying, Jack Reynolds didn't curse the machine. He trusted it, because he knew somewhere, back in Burbank, people he'd never met had built her to do the impossible. March 3, 1944. RAF King's Cliff, England. Dawn broke over the airfield in streaks of red and gold, sunlight glinting off rows of parked P-38 Lightnings. The air buzzed with tension. Ground crews prepped the fighters, fueling, arming, and checking every control surface. In the distance, B-17 bombers were already rolling out, engines growling in synchronized thunder. The mission code was Thunder Run, a deep penetration escort strike over central Germany. Target: an aircraft engine plant near Hanover, a critical node in the Luftwaffe's collapsing production chain. Jack Reynolds and his squadron, the 55th Fighter Group, had the job of keeping the bombers alive. It sounded simple on paper: stay close, fend off attacks, bring them home. In reality, it was one of the most dangerous assignments in the 8th Air Force. The Luftwaffe had grown desperate. Their new tactic was wave attacks, staggered strikes by groups of 20 or more fighters designed to overwhelm American escorts through sheer persistence. For the P-38 squadrons, it meant hours of high-altitude combat, fuel burn at redline, and constant radio chaos. Reynolds' call sign for the mission was Sweet P-1. He led a 4-ship element, his wingman Hollis off his right, and 2 younger pilots trailing behind. The weather was thin cloud cover at 25,000 feet, visibility perfect. As they climbed, Reynolds thought about what his crew chief O'Rourke had told him before takeoff. "The left turbo sounds a little rough, sir. Keep her under 30 inches boost till you clear the channel." Reynolds had smiled. "I'll bring her back in one piece." He didn't know then that it would be a lie. At 11:45 a.m. over Hanover, the flak began. Black puffs blossomed like malignant flowers all around the bomber stream. Reynolds' headset crackled with bomber calls. "Lead to escort, we're taking heavy at 9 o'clock. Repeat, heavy flak." Through the canopy, Reynolds could see the bursts walking toward the formation. Tight, accurate. He banked hard left, weaving to draw fire. Then came the fighters. Dozens of Focke-Wulf 190s and Messerschmitt 109s diving from above, their cannon flashes like strobe lights in the sun. Reynolds keyed his radio. "Bandits high, 2 o'clock, let's move." The sky erupted. P-38s split into pairs, twisting and rolling, machine guns chattering in rhythmic bursts. The Lightning's nose-mounted guns gave it brutal precision. 5 weapons firing straight down the sightline. No wing convergence needed. Reynolds scored his first kill of the day within minutes, a head-on pass that sent a Messerschmitt spiraling down in smoke. He pulled hard right, feeling the G's bite into his ribs. His wingman stayed tight on his tail. But then, the explosion. A blinding flash from his left engine. The Lightning jerked sideways as the propeller froze mid-spin. Hydraulic pressure plummeted, the cockpit filled with the acrid stench of burning oil. Reynolds slammed his throttle forward and shouted into the radio, "Mayday! Left engine out! Continuing westbound!" Static answered him. His wingman's voice broke through faintly. "Bail out, Jack. You're on fire." But Reynolds didn't pull the handle. He looked down and saw the bombers still crawling toward their target below, flak bursting around them. If he turned back, he'd lead the Luftwaffe straight into them. So instead, he pushed the Lightning forward, smoke trailing like a black comet. He flew the next 7 minutes on instinct and rage, one engine screaming, one dead, through anti-aircraft fire and swirling fighters. Later, after the war, German intelligence would note the day in a report. Enemy twin-boom fighter single-engine operating continued engagement after sustaining critical damage. Highly unusual. Pilot demonstrated extreme determination. What they didn't know was that Reynolds wasn't just determined. He was angry, not at them, at the idea that his machine, his sweet pea, would die without a fight. That fury carried him through the rest of the mission, and into legend. The fire in the left engine spread fast, licking along the wing root and spitting sparks across the canopy. Reynolds coughed, flicked the fuel selector, and killed the feed to the damaged side. The flames sputtered and died down, but the Lightning was crippled. Flying a P-38 on one engine wasn't impossible. It was just deadly. The plane would yaw violently toward the dead side, torque pulling it into an uncontrollable roll. The only way to keep it level was to counterbalance with trim, rudder, and raw instinct, a physical battle of strength and touch. Reynolds fought the controls with both legs locked, sweat pouring down his back. The stick vibrated under his palms like a living thing. The airspeed dropped. 270 knots. 240. 210. He was losing lift. He had two options, bail out or dive. But diving meant heat, and heat meant the left side oil fire might flare back to life. So he did the unthinkable. He leveled off at 10,000 feet, one engine screaming, the other a silent corpse. Below him, German fields slid past in a checkerboard blur. To the west lay the Rhine. Beyond that, maybe, Allied lines. He had 40 miles of open sky to cross, 40 miles of flak towers, patrols, and chants. Radio silence surrounded him. His squadron was gone, scattered, fighting for their lives. The bombers were retreating. He was alone. A flicker of movement snapped his eyes to the right. Two dark specks growing fast. Messerschmitts. They'd seen him. Reynolds tightened his harness, throttled up the good engine, and muttered, "All right, sweetheart. Just one more dance." The Messerschmitts came in from the sun. Classic high-speed slashing attack. Reynolds rolled right, then pulled left, forcing them to overshoot. With one engine, he couldn't outrun them, but he could still outthink them. The P-38's design, its much-maligned twin-boom structure, was about to save his life. The asymmetrical thrust that had tried to kill him minutes ago now became a weapon. By feathering the dead prop and playing the throttle on the live engine, Reynolds could pivot the aircraft faster than any German pilot expected. The first Messerschmitt roared past his nose. Reynolds squeezed the trigger. The Lightning's 5 guns spat a storm of lead, the tracers walking straight into the 109's fuselage. It disintegrated mid-air, one down. The second dove under him, trying to climb up behind. Reynolds yanked the stick back hard. The P-38 groaned, the airframe shuddering, but it climbed. At the top of the loop, his left wing nearly stalled. The asymmetry nearly killed him. But he rolled out just in time, guns flashing. A lucky hit. The German peeled off, trailing smoke. Reynolds was shaking. His oxygen was nearly gone. His instruments flickered. The altimeter read 8,000, then 6,500. He could see the Rhine ahead, a silver ribbon under the sun. "Come on, girl, just a little more." Every vibration, every rattle, every scream from the engine sounded like time running out. By the time he crossed the river, the Lightning was gliding. The prop spun lazily, the other dead, the gauges reading 0. Reynolds spotted a stretch of farmland, flat, empty. He lined up, flaps down, wheels half-locked. The P-38 hit the ground in a shower of dirt and torn metal, the cockpit filled with dust. When it stopped, there was silence, except for the slow ticking of the cooling engine. Reynolds sat there, breathing hard, staring through the cracked canopy. He'd made it. 2 days later, a British patrol found the wreck, and the pilot sitting beside it, boots off, cleaning his sidearm. When they asked what happened, Reynolds just smiled and said, "She had one heart left. It was enough." The story spread like wildfire through the 8th Air Force. They called it the one-engine miracle. But the truth was simpler. It wasn't a miracle. It was a man who refused to stop fighting, and a machine that refused to die. The Germans who witnessed Jack Reynolds's crippled Lightning limping over the Rhine never forgot it. Local farmers later told Allied intelligence that the sight of the twin-boomed American fighter, one engine silent, the other screaming, was like a wounded bird that refused to fall. But to Luftwaffe pilots, it was worse than that. It was demoralizing. Captured reports from the German 5th Fighter Wing described it with clinical disbelief. The twin-engine American fighter continued combat despite critical failure. One engine inoperative. Still executed offensive maneuvers and maintained altitude. Pilots showed disregard for death. It didn't fit their doctrine. To the Luftwaffe, a damaged aircraft was a liability, a target. But the P-38 had rewritten that rule. Its redundancy, its ability to fly, fight, and even kill on one engine, was proof of something larger. American over-engineering had created a plane that refused to obey limits. When word reached Allied command that Reynolds had landed safely, they dispatched intelligence officers to debrief him. They wanted every detail: the altitude, engine behavior, airspeed, and fuel consumption. But Reynolds didn't talk about performance charts. He talked about trust. "When one side quit," he said, "the other didn't. That's how she kept me alive." For the men who listened, those words said everything about the P-38 and about the country that built it. Meanwhile, in Germany, morale among fighter groups was cracking. For years, the Luftwaffe had dominated the skies, priding themselves on discipline, skill, and precision. But by 1944, they faced an enemy that fought not with desperation, but with abundance. With machines so well made that even broken, they could win. Reynolds' encounter became part of a larger pattern noted by Allied analysts. Increasing numbers of Luftwaffe pilots were abandoning dogfights when American escort fighters held formation after sustaining damage. The message was psychological as much as tactical. If the Americans' aircraft couldn't be shot down easily, then neither could their will. Back in England, mechanics examined Reynolds' battered Lightning after it was shipped home. The left engine had been hit by 20mm cannon fire. The oil lines shredded. The wing spar was cracked in 2 places. The main hydraulic pump was offline. By every rule of aerodynamics, the aircraft should have disintegrated. Yet the structure held. The right engine had pushed beyond its rated limits for over 25 minutes without failing. Lockheed engineers studying the wreck simply nodded. "Built to last," one said. "Built to bring our boys home." Reynolds received the Distinguished Flying Cross 3 weeks later. In his speech, he didn't mention courage or heroism. He just said, "It wasn't my day to quit," and she knew it. For the rest of the war, whenever new pilots joined his squadron, they'd hear the story. The one-engine Lightning became legend, told in ready rooms and hangars across England. But the Germans remembered it too. A year later, a captured Luftwaffe pilot told his interrogators, "We feared the twin-boomed one most of all. Even when wounded, it still hunted." That was the P-38's legacy. It wasn't just a fighter. It was a symbol of stubborn survival, the embodiment of a nation that refused to stop moving forward. And Jack Reynolds, the man who trusted one living engine to bring him home, had shown the world that sometimes victory isn't about power, it's about endurance. In the weeks after Reynolds' impossible landing, his story rippled across the 8th Air Force like a radio wave. Pilots repeated it at breakfast, in briefing rooms, in the smoky bars of English villages. One engine, 2 kills, home alive. It wasn't just a story. It was a manual on what was possible when you stopped believing in the word impossible. The 55th Fighter Group, already one of the Air Force's most aggressive P-38 squadrons, began to fly differently. Their confidence grew. Where once a loss of one engine meant disengage and dive for home, now pilots stayed in the fight longer, using Reynolds tactics, sharp throttle control, feathered props, asymmetric turns, to keep the enemy guessing. One pilot, Lieutenant Pete Morgan, described the change in his diary. "We don't panic anymore. The plane can take it. The country that built this machine didn't design it to die easy. If Reynolds can bring his bird home on one heart, the rest of us have no excuse." By April 1944, that shift in attitude began showing in mission reports. Escort losses for the 55th dropped nearly 20%. P-38 pilots, once viewed as underdogs next to the faster Mustangs, were now drawing respect from bomber crews who called them the angels with two tails. Then came April 11th, a mission over Germany that would test whether Reynolds' legend was just a story or a new standard. The target? An oil refinery outside Magdeburg. Heavy flak. Predicted fighter resistance. High. Captain Reynolds led his squadron at 22,000 feet, his repaired Sweet Pea humming with twin engines newly overhauled. The weather was clear. Halfway to target, Luftwaffe radar picked them up. 20 Focke-Wulfs climbed fast from below. Reynolds' voice came through the radio calm, clipped. "Stay tight. Make 'em chase the tail, not the heart." The battle that followed was chaos sculpted into discipline. German fighters slashed in waves. The P-38s countered with precision turns and boom and zoom dives. One pilot, hit in the right engine, called out over the air, "She's dead, Cap. I'm bailing." Reynolds cut him off. "No, you're not. Trim her left. Feather it. Use the torque." A pause. Then the voice returned, astonished. "Hell, she's still flying." That pilot, Lieutenant Morgan, made it back to England on one engine, escorted by Reynolds himself. When he landed, the ground crew ran out cheering. He climbed down from the cockpit, eyes wide, hands shaking. "You were right," he told Reynolds. "She just needed someone who believed in her." From that day on, the men called it Reynolds' Rule. Never abandon a lightning that still breathes. Even high command took notice. In a report circulated among 8th Air Force leadership, a colonel wrote, "Pilot morale and technical confidence in the P-38 have increased notably since the Reynolds incident. Psychological effect immeasurable. Engineering belief validated in combat." To most people, it was just another footnote in the massive machinery of war. But for those who flew the twin-boomed fighter, it was more than data. It was doctrine. Because of one man's defiance, an entire group stopped fearing failure. And the P-38 Lightning, once mocked by some as a temperamental aircraft, became a symbol of something much larger, resilience made of rivets and courage. By the summer of 1944, the Luftwaffe was cracking. But among the pilots of the 55th Fighter Group, one phrase kept them steady through the blood and fire of Europe's skies. "If one engine dies, fly the other." It was late summer 1944 when the mission codenamed Iron Cross went wrong. The target was deep inside occupied France, a rail yard funneling troops and supplies to Normandy's defensive lines. The bombers were already under heavy flak, and their escort, Reynolds' group, was running low on fuel. That's when the clouds split open, and the Luftwaffe came screaming down. Over 30 German fighters, FW-190s and Bf-109s, dived from altitude, their cannon fire tearing through the formations. Radio chatter turned into chaos. Reynolds' voice broke through, steady as always. "Form on me. Watch your energy, not your fear." For 10 long minutes, the sky became a blender of tracer fire and vapor trails. Reynolds rolled his Lightning inverted, diving straight through the enemy formation, an insane maneuver no manual would ever approve. His guns barked in short surgical bursts. 2 Germans went down. Then came the voice that froze everyone on the channel. "Cap, I'm hit. Losing coolant." It was Lieutenant Pete Morgan, the same pilot who'd once made it home on one engine. Reynolds scanned the horizon. Smoke trailed from Morgan's right nacelle. The German fighters had spotted it too. 4 broke off from the main fight, curving in to finish him off. Reynolds could have climbed away. He had altitude, position, and command. But that wasn't who he was. He throttled up and dove after them, pulling 6 Gs until his vision blurred. At 400 miles per hour, he cut across the attacker's path. The P-38 screamed like a living thing, its twin booms leaving white contrails in the cold air. His first burst of fire stitched across the lead German's canopy. The FW-190 exploded into flame. The others scattered. But now Reynolds had traded altitude for chaos. As he leveled out, another German came head-on, cannon shells ripping past. Reynolds yanked left, firing instinctively, and the last thing he saw before impact was smoke and sunlight colliding in front of him. The 109 disintegrated. When his wingman found him seconds later, his Lightning was missing a chunk of its right tail boom. The stabilizer looked like Swiss cheese. But somehow, impossibly, he was still flying. Morgan limped beside him, his own P-38 coughing smoke. The two of them descended together side by side toward friendly lines. When they crossed the Channel coast, the radio crackled with laughter, disbelief, and raw emotion. "Cap," Morgan said, "we should be dead." Reynolds chuckled softly. "Guess nobody told her that?" Both aircraft made it back, barely. Ground crews counted 147 bullet holes in Reynolds's plane. Morgan's had even more. Neither pilot was seriously hurt. That night, over whiskey in the mess, the squadron's mechanic lifted his glass and said, "You two just proved the Lightning ain't an airplane. It's a stubborn miracle." The legend of that flight, the day 2 crippled P-38s outran death itself, spread through the airfields of England like a gospel. For the men who flew her, the P-38 wasn't just aluminum and firepower. It was faith you could touch. And Reynolds, the man who had once trusted a dead engine to bring him home, had now shown the world something even greater. That courage, like flight, doesn't depend on symmetry. It just needs one working heart. When the war finally ended, Jack Reynolds didn't return to parades or medals. He returned to silence. His P-38 Sweet Pea was too damaged to fly again, and was quietly scrapped in a depot outside London. But among the pilots of the 8th Air Force, her spirit never died. They spoke of her in the same breath as the men who had flown her. Quiet, stubborn, unwilling to give up. In pubs, in briefings, in the still moments before takeoff, new pilots were told, "If she's got one engine, she's got a soul." That was Reynolds' gift to them. Not just survival, but a creed. After the war, he returned home to Iowa, where he worked at a small airport fixing crop dusters. When reporters came asking for his story, he always said the same thing: "I didn't do anything crazy, I just didn't stop." But others saw it differently. Decades later, aviation historians pieced together what his act had truly meant. It wasn't just one pilot saving himself, it was a moment that redefined trust between man and machine. Lockheed engineers credited stories like his for influencing post-war aircraft design, emphasizing redundancy, safety, and durability. Aviation writer Bill Gunston later wrote, "Jack Reynolds' one-engine flight did more for pilot morale than any technical manual ever printed." Even German records preserved after the war acknowledged his defiance. A captured Luftwaffe colonel interviewed in 1946 said, "When we saw the Lightning fly home with half itself missing, we knew the war was lost, not because of bombs, but because of men who believed in their machines." By the time the Korean War began, the principles born from the Lightning had evolved into jet aircraft, the F-86 Sabre, the next generation of American dominance in the sky. But the heart behind them remained the same. Reynolds' story was taught in Air Force training schools as an example of initiative, discipline, and what the manuals called airmanship under duress. Years later, in 1965, an aging Reynolds was invited to a P-38 reunion in California. When he arrived, The last Flying Lightning in the U.S. Air Force performed a flyover in his honor. As the twin engines roared overhead, he looked up with tears in his eyes and said quietly, "There she is." Still flying. The crowd applauded, but Reynolds just smiled. "She always comes home," he whispered. For the men who knew him, that summed it up perfectly. The P-38 Lightning had become a legend, not because it was invincible, but because it embodied everything America built into its machines: endurance, adaptability, and faith. And Jack Reynolds? He became the embodiment of that same spirit. The pilot who fought physics, who flew on willpower and torque, who proved that courage didn't need both wings to fly. In the history books, his name sits quietly beside others, another line in the long story of airmen who refused to die. But in the hangars of memory, in the echo of engines long gone, his legend hums on, twin propellers spinning somewhere over a sky that still remembers. Because sometimes, the measure of greatness isn't in how high you fly, it's in how long you keep flying when everything says you shouldn't. Long after the war, when the roar of piston engines had faded into the whisper of jets, a new generation of engineers studied the numbers behind the legends. They found that the P-38 Lightning had the lowest pilot fatality rate among U.S. twin-engine fighters of World War II. It wasn't coincidence. It was design meeting faith. For every 100 Lightnings that went down, nearly 70 of their pilots survived. That's the math of survival. The math that Reynolds had trusted in the moment when reason said bail out. And that number became a quiet monument to every man who refused to let a dead engine mean a dead crew. When asked once what gave him the courage to keep flying that day, Reynolds answered simply, "I figured the plane wanted to live as much as I did." In those words lay the essence of an entire generation's resilience. Men who fused with their machines, who saw courage not as defiance but as duty, who believed that even in failure there was one more chance to make it home. At the small municipal airfield in Iowa, where Reynolds worked until his death, a rusted P-38 propeller still stands in the grass near the hangar doors. The local kids call it the Angel's Wing. Every Memorial Day, a single wreath appears there. No name, no plaque, just flowers and silence. If you look closely at the old metal, the bullet holes are still there, patched and weathered. The scars tell the truth that every pilot learned the hard way. War doesn't just destroy, it reveals. It reveals what holds when everything else breaks. It reveals how faith in one's comrades, one's craft, and one's country can outlast fear itself. It reveals that even a machine, when built by free hands and brave hearts, can reflect the soul of the men who fly it. Jack Reynolds' name isn't etched on marble, but his flight lives on in every pilot who trusts his instruments, in every mechanic who fixes what others would scrap, in every soldier who refuses to surrender to odds or gravity. And so the story ends as it began, with a P-38 flying on one engine, cutting through cloud and chaos, a lone spark defying the void. Because courage, like flight, isn't about how long you stay in the sky. It's about refusing to fall before you've reached home.